In this tutorial, you will learn how to configure Socrate Business Services, or SBS for short, for first use. The tutorial is specifically aimed at new users who need to configure their organization's access without any previous knowledge of SBS. More specifically, you will learn basic SBS concepts, how to sign up for a new SBS account, how to generate an API access key for your applications, how to call the SBS API, how to invite users from your organization to view or manage SBS API data through a web UI, how to invite users from your organization to view or manage your organization's SBS account. You can conveniently perform all of the tasks above from a web application called SBS Console. SBS is a multi-tenant, multi-application cloud API provider. It was built with the following key concepts in mind: your organization, your organization's business logic, and your organization's customers. In SBS, these three concepts roughly translate into the following structure. The account, application, and tenant entities are the pillars of SBS architecture and are all managed from a web application called the SBS Console. Let's examine these entities one by one. To use Socrate Business Services, your organization requires an SBS account. An SBS account groups together all the API keys and other high-level SBS settings that your organization defines. The SBS account also acts as a billing point for usage of SBS services. An application is technically an API client that calls the SBS APIs. It may be a purely virtual application that does not actually exist in the real world, or it may refer to some actual piece of software that your organization has. For example, your organization may have a website, a desktop app, and a mobile app that all need to call Socrate Business Services APIs. From the SBS perspective, these are all applications, and they should all be defined as such under your organization's SBS account. The main purpose of applications is to group together various configuration settings that are meaningful at that level. For example, if you intend to use the email service and allow integration with OAuth 2.0 providers such as Google or Azure, then the respective OAuth 2.0 client secrets are defined at application level. Likewise, if you intend to use the e-factura service, the OAuth 2.0 secrets for access to the Romanian Tax Authority API are defined at application level. The settings defined at application level affect all the API callers using that application. Let's call them tenants. A tenant is an entity that consumes the SBS API. A tenant is typically some organization that has licensed your SBS-driven application, although it may also be a physical person. A tenant is important in terms of API usage. As you will see next in this tutorial, each call to the SBS APIs requires an API access key known as its service access key. A service access key is always associated with a specific application and tenant that makes the call. All your organization's customers should be added as tenants in SBS if they need to call SBS APIs from any of your applications. That's because a tenant is an API consumer, which may be important for tracking API usage and for billing purposes. To put it simply, you need to create at least one tenant to call the SBS API. If your organization does not need to segregate API usage by tenant and just needs to consume the SBS APIs for its own purpose, you still need to create at least one tenant. This tenant will identify your organization as a consumer of the SBS API within the realm of your SBS account. To call an API, you typically need some form of authentication like a token or a service access key. SBS provides access to its APIs based on service access keys or tokens. Service access keys are suitable for use in back-end applications, while tokens are more appropriate for browser-based applications. A service access key uniquely identifies your application and your application's tenant to the API. This means that when you generate a service access key, you must specify the application and tenant for which you are generating it. In other words, you can generate service access keys for each unique application tenant combination that may possibly exist in your SBS account. As illustrated in the diagram, each service access key originates from a particular application and tenant, and each API call requires a service access key. The major benefit of such setup is that API data is isolated to that particular app and tenant combination only. Likewise, API usage can be tracked down to that particular application and tenant combination only. Now that you have all the basic information to get started, it's time to configure your SBS account for real-world usage. To create a new SBS account, all you need is an email address. Firstly, visit console.socrate.io. Then choose your preferred method of authentication. You can use your existing Google or Microsoft email address, or if you prefer to sign up with some other email address, choose sign up with Socrate.io. After signing in, click Create SBS Account. Follow the wizard steps to finish the account creation. The mandatory fields are underlined in orange color. After creation, the name and unique ID of your SBS account are displayed at all times in the application bar, for example. In some cases, you might want to create multiple SBS accounts. For example, you may create an account for development and another one for production. If you have multiple accounts, you can easily switch between them as follows. Click your user profile picture in the right corner of the application bar and select Switch Account. To complete the next steps, your SBS account must be activated. If you haven't activated it yet, please contact us for details by using the links under the video. Let's begin by creating a new application. In the Applications page, click New Application. Enter the name of your application and click Save. Let's now create a new tenant. In the Tenants page, click New Tenant. Enter the name of your tenant and click Save. Let's now generate a new service access key that will allow the tenant and application created previously to access the SBS API. In the Tenants page, select the tenant created previously. Click the Add button in the top right corner of the Service Access Keys table. Under Applications, select the application created previously. Optionally, enter a key description. Under Scope, enter the extent of permissions available to the bearer of this key. To keep things simple, let's create the key with the full set of permissions. Remember that you can edit the key's permissions later if necessary. This key will provide access to all queries of any SBS service, and to all mutations of any SBS service. Here the terms queries and mutations are as they are understood in GraphQL. Namely, a query retrieves API data while a mutation modifies API data. Click Generate Service Access Key and copy the secret key. You can now use this secret key in your server applications to call any SBS service. You should allow only trusted technical personnel in your organization to view and use API keys. Now that you have a service access key to the SBS API, you can use it in your program code or business application. As an example, let's call the email service and send an email using the SBS API. Open email-api.socrate.io/GraphQL in your browser. This is the endpoint to the email service. In the HTTP headers section at the bottom of the console, enter a value for the XAPI key header. This value must be the secret key you have generated previously. If you are calling the service from a custom application, make sure to populate the XAPI key HTTP header programmatically. Enter the GraphQL mutation that actually sends an email. In this example, we send an email from the default SBS sender to your email address. Make sure to replace the input value your _email address with your actual email address. Click the play button to run the mutation and send the actual email. As you may already know, APIs don't have a UI and are called by client applications, not directly by end users. As a bonus, SBS provides a way for users in your organization to interact with the API through a web UI. This web UI is known as SBS Portal. You can invite any person in your organization to become an SBS Portal user, in which case they will be able to interact with SBS from a web user interface. The SBS Portal is built on top of SBS APIs. Its UI provides nearly the same functionality as the API themselves. To take just an example, if you have licensed the email service, then you can sign into the SBS Portal and send email from the GUI as if you would by calling the API. Access to the SBS Portal is permission-based. You may grant as many or as few permissions as required by a portal user's actual business needs. Also, you can easily add and remove users to the SBS Portal and modify their current permissions whenever required. Let's invite a new portal user to the current account and grant this user access to a few SBS APIs. Click Portal Users in the navigation menu on the left-hand side. Click Invite Portal User. Enter the user's email address. Optionally, enter a text for the invitation message. It is possible to grant multiple permission sets to the same user, where each set is for a different application tenant combination. In this example, we are creating only one permission set for the application and tenant created previously. Click the Add button to add a new permission set for the user. In this example, the permissions we are granting to the user are as follows. Read and write rights to the Romanian e-facture service. Read and write rights to the Romanian ANAF authorization service. Here the terms query and mutation are as they are understood in GraphQL. Namely, a query retrieves API data while a mutation modifies API data. Then click Send Invitation. The user's invitation is now displayed in the list of accounts with an invitation pending status. This status signifies that the user must first accept the invitation from their email inbox before they get access to the APIs. Once the user accepts the invitation and signs into the SBS portal at portal.socrate.io, they will be able to see and interact with the APIs that they've been given access to. If you changed your mind, you can remove pending invitations by clicking Remove. If you do this, the user will no longer be able to fulfill the invitation sent by email and thus will not get any access. You can also remove portal users from the SBS account after they accept the invitation. To do this, click Remove next to the portal user record. As mentioned previously, an SBS account groups together all the API keys, API users, and other high-level SBS settings that your organization defines. Because an SBS account keeps under the same umbrella-sensitive configuration data, access to your SBS account should be restricted only to entitled personnel in your organization. As the first user to have created an SBS account for your organization, you are the root user of that account. Note that there can only be one root for each SBS account. The root user always has the full set of permissions and cannot be removed from the account. As a root user, you can invite other users in your organization to the account and define their permissions with respect to the account. Also, you can change the permissions of existing account users or remove them from the account completely. Let's invite a new user to the current account and grant to this user read-only access to the current SBS account. Click Account Users in the navigation menu on the left-hand side. Click Invite Account User. Enter the user's email address. Optionally, enter a text for the invitation message. Under Scope, enter the permissions that should be available to the newly created user. In this example, we want to grant the user read-only rights to the SBS account, so we'll choose Account API Query *. Then click Send Invitation. The user's invitation is now displayed in the list of accounts with an invitation pending status. This status signifies that the user must first accept the invitation from their email inbox before they get access to the SBS account. Once the user accepts the invitation and signs into the SBS console, they will be able to see all data of your SBS account. If you changed your mind, you can remove pending invitations by clicking Remove. If you do this, the user will no longer be able to fulfill the invitation sent by email and thus will not get access to the SBS account. You can also remove users from the SBS account after they accept the invitation. To do this, click Remove next to the account user record. This concludes the SBS Getting Started tutorial. For more information, check the links under the video. Thank you for watching.